I am 27 and I just got off a flight from hell, and I need to know if I'm a terrible person or if I was right to stand my ground. The entire plane was staring at me by the end, and I've never felt so judged in my life. But there's a lot more to this story than what everyone on that plane saw. Let me start with why this flight was so important to me. I was flying from Denver to Boston to see my dying grandmother. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the doctor said she has maybe 2 weeks left. I haven't seen her in 3 years because I've been working overseas as a nurse with Doctors Without Borders. This was supposed to be my goodbye visit. Here's the part that makes this complicated. I have severe chronic pain from a car accident 2 years ago that left me with 3 herniated discs and nerve damage down my left leg. I can walk and function normally most of the time, but sitting in cramped airplane seats for more than 2 hours causes excruciating pain that lasts for days afterward. I'm only 27, so people don't expect me to have these kinds of problems. Because of my condition, I always book aisle seats and pay extra for them. This flight was no exception. I paid an additional $89 to guarantee an aisle seat in the emergency exit row, which has extra legroom. I specifically chose this seat because I needed to be able to stretch my leg and get up frequently during the 4-hour flight. When I boarded the plane, there was already someone sitting in my assigned seat. It was a pregnant woman who looked to be around 7 to 8 months along. I politely showed her my boarding pass and explained that she was in my seat. That's when things got weird. The woman, who I'll call Sarah, looked at my boarding pass and said, "Oh, I know this is your seat, but I really need the extra legroom because of my pregnancy. I was hoping you'd be understanding and let me keep it." She said it like it was already decided, not like she was asking a favor. I explained that I had specifically paid extra for this seat due to my own medical condition, and I really needed to sit there. I suggested she speak to the flight attendant about finding another solution. That's when Sarah's husband got involved, and everything went downhill fast. Her husband stood up and said, "Seriously? You can't give up your seat for a pregnant woman? What's wrong with you?" He was talking loud enough that other passengers started looking at us. I felt my face getting red, but I stayed calm and explained again that I had paid for the seat and needed it for medical reasons. Here's what I didn't know at the time but found out later. Sarah and her husband had deliberately booked cheaper seats in the back of the plane, knowing that Sarah would need more room. Their plan was to find someone in the emergency exit row who would give up their seat out of politeness. They had tried this same trick on 2 previous flights and it worked both times. The flight attendant came over to see what the commotion was about. Before I could explain the situation, Sarah's husband launched into a speech about how his wife was having complications with her pregnancy and desperately needed the extra space. He mentioned that she had been having contractions earlier that morning, and that stress could be dangerous for the baby. The flight attendant looked at me expectantly, clearly assuming I would be the bigger person and give up my seat. When I explained that I had paid extra for the seat due to my own medical needs, she looked skeptical. She actually said, "Well, pregnancy is a temporary condition, and this woman clearly needs the seat more than you do." That comment made my blood boil. I told the flight attendant that my chronic pain was not temporary, and that I had followed all the proper procedures to ensure I had the seat I needed. I said I was sympathetic to Sarah's situation, but I wasn't going to give up something I had paid for and medically required. Here's where it gets really messy. Sarah started crying. Not just tearing up, but full-on sobbing with her hands on her belly. She said, "I can't believe someone would be so selfish when a baby's health is at stake. What if something happens because I'm cramped in that tiny seat?" Other passengers started getting involved. An older man behind me said I should be ashamed of myself. A woman across the aisle offered to switch with Sarah, but Sarah's husband said that seat didn't have enough legroom either. It became clear they wanted the emergency exit row specifically, not just any seat with a bit more space. The flight attendant was getting frustrated because we were holding up takeoff. She told me that if I didn't voluntarily switch seats, she would have to involve the captain. The implication was that I might be removed from the flight for being disruptive. That's when I made a decision that I'm still questioning. I told the flight attendant that if she wanted me to give up my seat, I would need to speak to the captain myself and explain my medical situation. I also said that I would need written documentation that I was being forced to give up a seat I had paid for due to my disability. The word disability seemed to change the whole dynamic. The flight attendant looked uncomfortable, and went to consult with her supervisor. While she was gone, Sarah's husband kept making comments about how I was probably making up my medical condition, and that I looked perfectly healthy to him. What he didn't know, and what I haven't told anyone, is that I was actually in significant pain already from the stress and standing. The medication I take for my chronic pain makes me look normal on the outside, but the nerve damage causes shooting pains that are invisible to everyone else. I was starting to feel nauseous from the pain, but I couldn't show weakness because I knew it would look like I was faking it. The flight supervisor came over and quietly asked me about my condition. I explained about the herniated discs and showed her the prescription bottles in my carry-on bag. She seemed more understanding than the flight attendant and asked if there was any way we could resolve this without involving the captain. Here's where I learned something that changed everything. The supervisor told me that Sarah and her husband had been flagged in the airline system for this exact behavior. They had made scenes on multiple flights demanding seat changes, and other passengers had complained about their aggressive tactics. The supervisor said the airline was actually looking for a reason to ban them from future flights. But here's the part that made me feel terrible. While the supervisor was telling me this, Sarah collapsed in the aisle. She didn't faint, but she doubled over holding her stomach and saying she was having contractions. Everyone started panicking, and suddenly I looked like the monster who had stressed out a pregnant woman to the point of endangering her baby. The flight attendant called for medical assistance, and since I'm a nurse, I stepped forward to help. While I was checking Sarah's vital signs, I noticed something that made me suspicious. Her contractions were completely irregular, sometimes 30 seconds apart, sometimes 5 minutes apart. Real contractions, especially ones strong enough to cause collapse, follow a much more consistent pattern. I also noticed that Sarah kept opening her eyes to see if people were watching her, and her husband was more focused on recording the incident on his phone than on his wife's well-being. When I tried to ask Sarah medical questions about her pregnancy, she gave vague answers that didn't add up, but I couldn't call her out on potentially faking without looking like an absolute monster. So I played along, monitored her vital signs, and recommended that the flight be delayed until paramedics could check her condition. I figured if she was faking, she wouldn't want the delay and medical scrutiny. Sure enough, as soon as I mentioned paramedics, Sarah's contractions suddenly stopped. She said she was feeling much better and just needed to rest in a comfortable seat. Her husband immediately jumped in, saying that having the emergency exit seat would solve everything and prevent further episodes. The captain finally came out to assess the situation. He was an older man who seemed to have dealt with difficult passengers before. He asked Sarah if she needed medical attention, and when she said no, he asked her husband why they hadn't booked appropriate seats if Sarah's pregnancy required extra space. Sarah's husband got defensive and said they couldn't afford the seat upgrade fees. That's when another passenger spoke up. Apparently, she had overheard them earlier talking about their upcoming vacation to Europe that cost $8,000. So they could afford a luxury vacation but not an extra $89 for a seat upgrade. The captain made his decision. I would keep my assigned seat, and the airline would try to accommodate Sarah and her husband elsewhere on the plane. If no suitable seats were available, they would be rebooked on the next flight at no charge. Sarah's husband started yelling about discrimination against pregnant women, but the captain shut that down quickly. Here's what happened next that made me realize how manipulative this couple was. As soon as the captain walked away, Sarah's husband whispered to her, "We'll file a complaint and get compensation for this." They didn't think I could hear them, but I was sitting right there. They were already planning to turn this into a payday. The flight attendants found Sarah and her husband 2 seats together in the middle section with slightly more legroom than their original seats. It wasn't the emergency exit row, but it was a reasonable compromise. However, Sarah's husband refused the seats and demanded to be rebooked on a later flight so they could consult with their lawyer about the discrimination they experienced. As they were gathering their belongings to leave the plane, Sarah's husband made sure to announce loudly, "I can't believe this airline allows people to discriminate against pregnant women. My wife could have lost our baby because of that selfish woman." He pointed directly at me, ensuring everyone knew who he was talking about. The other passengers were split in their reactions. Some were clearly on Sarah's side and gave me dirty looks for the rest of the flight. Others seemed to understand that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. A few people even came up to me after takeoff to say they supported my decision to keep the seat I had paid for. But here's where I started to feel really guilty. About an hour into the flight, I overheard two women behind me talking about how they would never refuse to help a pregnant woman, regardless of the circumstances. One of them said, "Some people are just selfish and use medical excuses to get out of being decent human beings." That comment hit me hard because it made me wonder if I was overthinking the situation. Maybe Sarah really was having pregnancy complications, and I let my suspicion about her motives cloud my judgment. Maybe I should have just given up the seat to be safe, regardless of whether she was being manipulative. The guilt got worse when I started thinking about my grandmother. Here I was flying to see a dying woman who had always taught me to be kind and generous to others. What would she think about me refusing to help a pregnant woman? Would she be proud of me for standing up for myself, or ashamed that I wasn't more compassionate? When I finally arrived in Boston, I was exhausted and in significant pain from the stress and 4 hours of sitting. My leg was completely numb, and I could barely walk when I got off the plane. It took me 20 minutes just to make it to baggage claim, and I had to sit down 3 times. This reminded me why I had needed that aisle seat in the first place. But the story doesn't end there. When I got to my phone, I had multiple notifications from social media. Someone on the plane had filmed part of the incident and posted it online with the caption, entitled "Woman Refuses to Give Seat to Pregnant Lady." The video only showed me saying no to giving up my seat, not any of the context about paying extra or having a medical condition. The video has been shared thousands of times, and the comments are brutal. People are calling me heartless, selfish, and a terrible person. Someone even found my nursing license information online and started a petition to have it revoked because I'm unfit to care for patients. My employer has received dozens of complaint emails about me. The worst part is that my grandmother saw the video before I could explain the situation to her. When I arrived at the hospital, she asked me about it. I had to spend the first hour of what might be our last conversation together explaining why I'm not actually a monster. She believes me, but I hate that this controversy is overshadowing our precious time together. Here's the latest development that's making me question everything. I found out yesterday that Sarah posted her own version of events on a pregnancy forum, claiming that she was having serious complications and could have lost her baby because of my refusal to move. She's gotten hundreds of supportive comments and has started a GoFundMe for pregnancy discrimination recovery that has already raised over $3,000. But I also learned something that validates my suspicions. Another passenger from the flight reached out to me through social media. She's a labor and delivery nurse who was sitting a few rows back, and she confirmed that Sarah's contractions looked fake to her too. She said she's seen this kind of performance before from patients trying to get attention or special treatment. This nurse also told me something disturbing. She looked up Sarah's social media after the flight and found posts from just 2 days before showing Sarah at an amusement park riding roller coasters. If Sarah really was having pregnancy complications serious enough to need emergency exit seating, she definitely shouldn't have been on intense rides that could harm the baby. Now I'm torn between vindication and guilt. On one hand, the evidence suggests that Sarah and her husband were running a scam and I was right not to fall for it. On the other hand, what if I'm wrong? What if Sarah really was having problems and I let my cynicism prevent me from helping someone in need? The online harassment has been getting worse. Someone found my address and sent me a package containing baby items with a note saying, "Maybe this will remind you to have some compassion." Others have been leaving negative reviews for the medical facility where I work, claiming I'm cruel to pregnant patients. My friends and family are split on whether I did the right thing. My mom thinks I should have just given up the seat to avoid drama, regardless of who was right or wrong. My best friend says I was correct to stand up for myself and not let people manipulate me. My nursing colleagues are mostly supportive, but a few have expressed concern about how this reflects on our profession. The thing that's eating at me most is wondering about my true motives. Was I really protecting my medical needs and standing up against manipulation? Or was I just being stubborn and selfish? Did I refuse to move because I genuinely needed that seat, or because I was angry about being pressured and wanted to prove a point? I keep replaying the incident in my mind, looking for clues about what I should have done differently. Maybe I could have asked more questions about Sarah's specific medical needs. Maybe I could have offered to pay for her seat upgrade instead of refusing to move. Maybe I could have found a compromise that worked for everyone. But then I remember how Sarah's husband immediately started recording and talking about lawyers, and I think maybe there was no good solution. Maybe they were always going to turn this into drama regardless of how I handled it. The final thing that's complicating my feelings: my grandmother passed away yesterday, just 2 days after I arrived. In her final moments, she told me she was proud of me for being strong and not letting people take advantage of me. She said that sometimes doing the right thing means standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult. But I can't help wondering if the stress of this whole situation affected the time I had with her. Instead of focusing completely on our goodbye, part of my mind was always on the airplane incident and the online backlash. I'll never know if I would have been more present with her if I had just given up that seat and avoided the whole mess. So Reddit, AITA for refusing to give up my airplane seat to a pregnant woman? Was I right to protect my own medical needs and paid for seat? Or should I have been more compassionate and given her the benefit of the doubt, even if I suspected she was being manipulative? I honestly don't know anymore, and with my grandmother gone, I've lost the one person whose opinion I trusted most to help me figure out if I'm a good person or not. The airline just contacted me. They reviewed the security footage from the gate area and confirmed that Sarah and her husband were discussing their seat switching strategy before boarding. They're offering me compensation for the harassment I've experienced and have banned the couple from future flights. Sarah's GoFundMe has been shut down after people reported it for fraud. Apparently this isn't the first time she's run this type of scam. I should feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel sad about the whole situation. I received a message from someone claiming to be Sarah's sister. She says Sarah isn't actually pregnant. She's been faking pregnancies for attention and money for over a year. She's apparently done this on buses, trains, and planes multiple times. If this is true, then I was completely right to refuse, but it doesn't make me feel any better about how everything played out.